All right. Reacting to a video of Ben Shapiro criticizing Donald Trump. Oh, let's hear him out.
First, the news moves fast. Bad news moves fastest of all. Every day, it gets harder to tell what's real, what's manufactured to control and discourage us. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more facts. That's why starting today, we are giving you more of the Ben Shapiro Show. Actually, 2 times more of the Ben Shapiro Show. That's right. We are making the show longer. Twice the analysis, twice the fact. Join in at dailywire.com/subscribe. Lots and lots of news. We begin with the biggest news, the most impactful news, which is, of course, that the U.S. and China have now apparently agreed to slash tariffs on one another. This is a deal reached by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's been looking for an off-ramp with regard to these extraordinarily high tariffs that he said just last week were unsustainable with regard to China. Now, there will still be tariffs on China. China will still have tariffs on American product, but we are starting to move toward what looks like a significantly more rational trade policy with the rest of the world. So yes, we have still significantly raised tariffs on the rest of the world. That 10% flat rate tariff still exists on the rest of the world. Now, the 125 to 145% tariffs that were placed on the Chinese, those have been lowered. According to the Wall Street Journal, after weekend talks in Geneva, President Trump's reciprocal tariff on China will fall to 10% from 125%. So essentially the same as the tariffs that we currently have on, say, England or any other country. A separate 20% tariff the president imposed over what he described as China's role in the fentanyl trade is going to remain. So presumably that means really it's not a 10% tariff, it's a 30% tariff, which again, looks more rational. As I've said from the beginning, when it came to tariffing China, going after China as an actual geopolitical opponent is necessary. This is the thing that President Trump did in term 1. That was absolutely necessary. And everybody seemed to buy into on the right and the left in the United States. I've talked to many, many Democrats who have acknowledged that Trump was right to reset the table with regard to China. So attempting to box China in with regard to trade, attempting to create a divide in the world such that third-party countries move toward the United States and away from China.
I'm going to give a reasonable take. China, understanding there's really 2 ways to kind of look at it. Do you want United States supremacy of the world, basically? And it sounds worse than it actually is. It's just the United States retaining its influence as the #1 country in the world. And as an American, of course, my bias will say that, yeah, of course, I want America to be the #1 country in the world and kind of hold on to this supremacy, so to speak. Or do you believe in more cooperation and diplomacy and a kind of shared power and shared belief around the world? There is a kind of mindset, a possibility, similar to how the United States work with differing ideologies and cultures, that applying that same mindset around the world could be effective. And it could be prosperous ultimately. But that would require these other countries to buy into the idea. And that's another way of thinking it. Ultimately, when it comes to dealing with China, I think there is the validity to the idea of pressuring China, being firm-handed when dealing with China. I mean, even the Democrats agreed, like Shapiro said. Matter of fact, Joe Biden kept a lot of the tariffs on China that Donald Trump had before. Now, some tariffs that Donald Trump did in his first term were awful and ruined the agricultural sector. Again, this is just him doing a lot of things that he doesn't know what he's doing. But ultimately, pressuring China inherently is not bad. That's why anytime, we're having these things going on with China, I'm like, yeah, we're doing bad stuff. Like, these tariffs are ridiculous, but I will never be pro-China over pro-America. That will never happen.
China, that is a good thing. Reshoring critical industries away from China toward third parties or toward the United States is a very good thing. But if you're going to do this, you need to do it in rational fashion. That means gradually escalating tariffs on China such that manufacturers actually have time to move out of China before the door is slammed shut on them. You actually need to
Where was this Ben Shapiro for so goddamn long, man? This is the rational Ben Shapiro that I used to respect.
Sure, critical supply chains like rare earth minerals in order to ensure that we aren't just deprived of the things that we need in the United States in order to compete with China. You need to cut better trade deals with everybody around China so that they don't orient toward China and away from us, and you need to build up the U.S. Navy. We didn't do any of those things. We just sort of ran into the room, threw 145% tariff on the table, and ran out of the room while simultaneously slapping other countries with a rubber chicken. It turns out that was not exactly a great trade policy. The good news is, as I've said all along with President Trump lives in the world of reality. If the headlines are bad, he responds. If the stock market doesn't seem to be doing what he wants it to do, he responds. So long as good information penetrates whatever echo chamber is around him, he will in fact respond to incentives. It's one of the things.
I think that's a little too optimistic. I don't know if he's responding to the backlash versus responding to certain individuals with a lot of money in their pockets and a lot of power that are also pissed. I mean, I think that's probably more so like the billionaire friends, the close guys next to him that is influencing him a lot. I think that's more so what it is. I think you're being a little too generous here.
That made him a successful president in term one. It's the thing that will make him a successful president in term two. He might start off with a bad idea from, say, Peter Navarro. But if it turns out that bad idea has real world ramifications that damage his presidency, then he moves away from that bad idea. That's what's happening with regard to China. So again, the tariffs aren't going away with regard to China, but they are being dramatically lowered with regard to China. Beijing is going to cut its own retaliatory levies on U.S. goods to 10% from 125%. The U.S. says that the reductions are going to last for 90 days while the talks continue, but let's be real about this. They're not going away. Whenever President Trump says that there's going to be a break in the tariff regime, the idea they're going to snap back in 90 days to 125, 145%. Again, the Treasury Secretary said last week that was unsustainable, so it's not going to be sustained. We're not going back to those tariff rates. Now, again, this is starting to look much more like a rational trade policy. The markets, of course, spiked because everybody in the markets was looking for some sort of off-ramp here. They're trying to figure out exactly what President Trump is doing on trade. Now, I think the markets are spiking a little bit much. What I mean there is that the markets are a momentum-driven instrument. The markets are now trading higher than they were after Liberation Day. So Liberation Day, you recall, April 2nd, that is when President Trump announced this giant tariff regime on the rest of the globe combined, and the markets dropped dramatically. The Dow was trading about 43,000. Well, now the markets are trading up around where they were before. That seems to me a weird calibration based on momentum. And the reason I say that is because if you were to just look at the trade policy before Liberation Day and the trade policy after Liberation Day, the idea that those trade policies are identical and therefore the markets should be identical, obviously that's not true. There are a bunch of 10% tariffs that now exist that didn't exist before. There's still heavy levies against Chinese goods that didn't exist that now exist. So the markets are going to recalibrate. It'll probably end up lower, if I had to guess, than it is right now. But clearly, the markets are moving toward more sanguinity, and they should be, because President Trump has been pushing deregulation at the same time he's pushing this. He's been pushing forward that big, beautiful tax bill. And we'll get to the tax bill a little bit later on in the show, where the negotiations stand. He's floated some good ideas. He's floated some bad ideas with regard to this tax bill. However, this is also going to lead to the possibility of things like Fed rate cuts. So the Federal Reserve has been holding off on cutting the interest rates because of fears of inflation. If President Trump does not continue with this massive tariff regime, the chances of inflation are going to drop. If the chances of inflation drop, then you could see a lowering of the interest rates, which means more liquidity in the markets. It means cheaper mortgages. It means the economy continues to kind of truck along.
Agreed. Okay. I mean, these are very rational points. It's like so good to hear someone rational say like rational things, right? He's 100% correct when it comes down to it. That the reason why, even though Donald Trump has been constantly demanding the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, they just refuse to because of the volatility due to his tariffs. So if we can find some level of stability, then good, but it's really hard to say because he really acts off of emotion and he acts very irrationally oftentimes. So Donald Trump's unpredictability is just as volatile as the stock market right now.
Right now, according to traders, there's a 57% chance the Federal Reserve holds rates steady through its next two meetings, which was up from 40% as of Friday. However, as the markets adjust, I think that you will see that people are going to start betting on the idea that the Federal Reserve theoretically could, in fact, cut the rates if, again, there is more momentum.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything
in this direction. I think, again, that what happened here is that reality set in. President Trump understood the reality and he responded to the reality, which is good. You want a president who actually responds to realities. In this way,
at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro is still a Republican, so of course he's going to look glass half full when it comes to Donald Trump. But at least it's not like blind loyalty and understanding that he's not a god. Like, I don't think Ben Shapiro is a part of the MAGA cult. I think he's a Republican that prefers a Republican leader and will support a Republican leader no matter what. That also plays into the political game that I hate. Just because he's on your side politically in terms of ideology doesn't mean you need to support him unilaterally. But it is what it is.
This way, the president that President Trump actually most resembles in the recent past is actually Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton in 1993-94 pushed forward Hillary Care, got absolutely shellacked, and then moved to the right and governed as a sort of centrist for the rest of his term. He did welfare reform, for example. He did criminal justice reform bills. He had an actual surplus. President Trump is much more pragmatic. He's kind of Clintonian in the way that he is pragmatic in his politics, as opposed to ideologically driven the way, say, Barack Obama or Joe Biden was.
That's a very another very generous characterization of Donald Trump's behavior. I don't think he's pragmatic at all. So, I mean, the idea that if someone does something very stupid that everybody knows is bad, like the entire world knows it's bad, and he goes back off of the stupid thing he does, that doesn't make him pragmatic at all. That makes him more... I don't even know what a term for that. It's more like childish. That's like something a child would do. A child would do something very, very stupid. She would say sorry for it, and then you would forgive her. There's really no justification for that. Now, if you did something that would make a lot of sense is you did a policy that was either unpopular or just weren't working based off not understanding the ramification of the systematic way it will be implemented into a system, or the systematic way it was being implemented is working, but the general perception of the outcome or the general perception of the process is deemed unfavorable. So ultimately, I don't think that's what Donald Trump is doing. I think he's doing objectively terrible things and then just going back on them. So again, very generous characteristic.
And I think one of the reasons President Trump is looking for an off-ramp here is because he's starting to see the incoming wall of the hurricane. As I said before, there was a hurricane headed for American shores, economically speaking. That hurricane came in the form of a giant cascade of empty ships that were arriving at American ports. And that was going to create serious supply chain problems. President Trump doesn't like that. And so he is now acting in order to prevent that from effectuating, from becoming a reality. It's more on this in a moment. First, Pure Talk says, I don't think so, to $100 a month cell phone plans. That's just wasteful. It's irresponsible. Instead, they're offering America's most dependable 5G network at America's most sensible prices. Listen to this. Unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data, plus mobile hotspot for just $35 a month. And the best part, right? But now the spend is sky high and increasing every single year. What if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance at the same exact next generation for life? Networking. For networking, all the tariff wars are over. Does this mean that we are moving toward a more free trade world? No, it means there's still going to be tariff barriers, which is why I think that the stock market's jump today is maybe a little overstated. And as reality sets in, it's going to settle about back where it was, maybe a little bit lower than it was before Liberation Day, so-called Liberation Day. Here's Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying 10% tariffs remain here. They're not going anywhere.
So we do expect a 10% baseline tariff to be in place for the foreseeable future, but don't buy the silly arguments that the U.S. consumer pays. Businesses, their job is to try to sell to the American consumer, and domestically produced products are not going to have that tariff.
However, the reason that the markets are in fact optimistic is because, as James McIntosh writes over at the Wall Street Journal, the grown-ups are in the room. The reason for the giant bounce in the stock market is because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is now in control of trade policy and presumably in control of regulatory policy and tax policy as well. So what exactly is Bessent still looking for? A deeper reform of the Chinese economy, turning it from a mercantilist exporter into a consumer and leading to more balanced trade. Now, again, that is going to be hard, but the reality is we are now avoiding the hurricane that was approaching, and I think the economy is responding to that in very good ways. So good for President Trump, good for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Meanwhile, in other news, Idan Alexander, who's the last remaining alive American hostage who'd been taken by Hamas on October 7th, is set to be released today. It was going to happen sometime between 8 a.m.
It's kind of hilarious how Scott, I believe it was Scott Bessent, didn't know about some of the tariffs that Donald Trump is doing. But now he's allowed to do his job. Just now he's allowed to do his job about like 100 days in. Okay. Again, we gotta be honest on what was going on, man. So
8 a.m. and 8 p.m.
It is
Israel time. The Red Cross, which has been utterly derelict in its treatment of the hostages, meaning it had no contact with any of the hostages for well over a year, is going to be facilitating all of this. Obviously, it's a deeply moving moment that Idan Alexander is coming out as a 21-year-old Israeli-American dual citizen, and he was kidnapped on October 7th. I, of course, know the Alexander family. I know his parents, Yael and Adi. I know his brother, Roy. In fact, I brought them to the Ohel, to the grave of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson in New York on October 7th, and I had them meet with President Trump. You can see here, that's his mom, that's his brother, and they're showing President Trump a picture of Idan Alexander. So Idan Alexander is coming out today. Big question is, what did Hamas receive in return? And it appears that Hamas actually received very little. So this is a good deal by the Trump administration in that sense. It is creating, and again, whenever you have a hostage deal, there's no such thing as a good hostage deal because you are dealing with hostage takers. However, the question is what concessions Hamas received on the other end. There are a lot of rumors about what exactly Hamas received on the other end of releasing Idan Alexander. Some rumors include the idea that perhaps the United States will now be more amenable to Hamas being a part of the future of governing the Gaza Strip. That would be insane and ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. Hamas took Idan Alexander a hostage in the first place. They took 250 people.
So there's a lot of conversation that Ben Shapiro's newfound reasonable criticism of Donald Trump is also in due part to stuff relating Israel and I'm just going to say it like this, Jewish stuff, which, fair, if you have a deep ideological, not even ideological, deep cultural identity that he's being attacked or being threatened and people close to you are, you'll be more willing to act based off your personal values than playing these stupid politics games. So
hostage. A huge number of those people, including babies, were plain out murdered by Hamas. Hamas can, of course, have no part in the governance of the Gaza Strip. They need to be extirpated from the planet Earth. And the release of Idan Alexander doesn't actually change any of that math. There have also been rumors that this is going to lead to a sort of broader ceasefire deal. Maybe, maybe not. The Witkoff plan. Steve Witkoff, of course, is President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East. Steve Witkoff had proposed the possibility of a 45-day or 70-day ceasefire in exchange for 11 more hostages and 18 dead bodies. That may come to fruition. We'll have to see. There's been talk about humanitarian aid flowing into the Gaza Strip. The reason Hamas wants that is so they can steal all of it. So the question becomes, how is that aid secured? However, we can say it is an unabashed good that Idan Alexander is coming out again. It's an amazing thing for his family. I know the family. I was texting with them yesterday. It's an amazing thing. So good for the Trump administration along those lines. Clearly, what Hamas is attempting to do is basically settle all outstanding business with the United States so as to then create separation between the United States and Israel in Iran negotiations. That is what is happening with the Houthis as well. It is not a coincidence that as the Houthis are basically forswearing attacks on American shipping, and the United States is saying that the United States is no longer going to worry about the Houthis, essentially. That Hamas is now trying to do the same by releasing the sole living American hostage in the Gaza Strip, trying to basically say that the United States now has no part in that conflict. Well, okay, fine. I mean, if the United States has no part in that conflict, then Israel should just go and do what they need to do. That seems to me a proper solution with regard to the Gaza Strip. Now, the ugliest part, and there is an ugly part to this, is that there are widespread rumors and now news reports that Idan Alexander is going to be flown to Qatar to meet with the Emir of Qatar. This is vile. That's vile. He should, of course, meet with President Trump. He can do so in America. He can do so in Israel. There are plenty of places that Idan Alexander and his family can express their gratitude to President Trump, as well they should. Going to Qatar to meet the Emir of Qatar. Qatar is a terror sponsor country. Qatar is the number one funder of Hamas. It is disgusting to have a hostage who is taken by a group funded by Qatar go to Qatar to thank the Emir of Qatar for his freedom. That's an absurdity on its face if it were to happen. It is wrong. It should not be facilitated by the United States. Qatar is the sponsor state of Hamas. In fact, if the Trump administration seriously wanted all hostages out of Gaza, they could do so tomorrow simply by telling the Emir of Qatar that the airbase in Qatar is going away and that it'll move to the UAE, which the United States could do. That should have been the approach of the Biden administration on October 8th. They should have said all the hostages come out or the airbase goes away. That's how closely tied together Qatar.
It's funny. So again, this is the politics game. I listened to everything Ben Shapiro just said. Based off his logic, okay, he thinks Qatar is the primary funder. He might be right, actually. Okay. And then the rumors about this guy going to Qatar to thank the president and then also meeting Donald Trump there. So it's interesting how he praises Donald Trump, that he should meet him and he should thank him. He doesn't criticize Donald Trump for not creating a negotiation where he doesn't have to meet against this big enemy that you're claiming. And then he blames Biden for doing a strategy that Donald Trump could also do. Again, I know it's the politics game. I know you're a Republican. I know it's on your brand. I know this is how you make your money. But that's why I can't take certain people seriously when it comes to politics. You can't complain about these different issues if you don't let out your true beliefs. It seems like your true beliefs are hidden by a load of cash.
Qatar and Hamas are. Ladan Alexander is now 21. Hamas captured him when he was 19 on October 7th, 2023, of course. Now, all of this has some wider ramifications with regard to negotiations in the Middle East. Again, Steve Witkoff continues to say ridiculous things publicly. So Steve Witkoff, again, I do not think is a good negotiator. I do not think that Steve Witkoff has demonstrated his bona fides along any lines. So far, all of the hostage deals have essentially been kind of mediocre in the sense that maximum pressure has not been exerted on the bad guys. Yesterday, Witkoff said, we want to bring the hostages home, but Israel is not willing to end the war. Israel is prolonging it despite the fact that we don't see where else we can go, and that an agreement must be reached. There's currently an opportunity window we hope Israel and all the mediators will take advantage of. We're putting pressure on all the mediators and doing everything we can to bring the hostages home. It is not Israel's unwillingness to end the war that is leading to hostages being taken. That's like blaming the police for the kidnappers not releasing the hostages. No, actually, that's up to the kidnappers. Hamas could end the war today. They could have ended the war October 6th. It never had to happen in the first place. Meanwhile, all of this is part and parcel of broader negotiations happening over the Iranian nuclear program. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States said it was encouraged by talks with Iran on Sunday after a meeting, but the two sides remain divided on key questions, including whether Tehran will be allowed to enrich its own uranium. Well, I mean, that is the key question. That is not one key question. That is the key question. The United States should have no interest in a deal with Iran where Iran continues to develop nuclear missiles. That is ridiculous. Anything that allows them the capacity to continue to develop nuclear materials, which can then be tied to their ballistic missile program, is insane. The United States should not be party to that. That is the JCPOA. That is the thing that Donald Trump labeled the worst deal in history. The United States should not be conceding points to the Iranian government. Again, Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met for 3 hours in the Omani capital of Muscat in their fourth round of negotiations since April 12th. After the meeting, the U.S. cast the latest talks, mediated by Omani officials, as positive and said the diplomacy would continue in the near future. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman said talks were difficult but useful in better understanding the U.S. position. Now, again, Iran has another goal in these talks. If they can't get a bad deal from the Trump administration, and again, I have faith that President Trump is not going to cut JCPOA Part 2. It would be a rejection of his own legacy. If Iran has another goal, it is delay. And a delay for Iran is as good as a deal. In October, the JCPOA period ends. At that point, they can simply rush to a bomb. Now, they could just rush to a bomb right now as well. They can simply violate whatever is left of the JCPOA, and they could rush to a bomb. Herein lies the problem. Right now, there's a window of opportunity for anyone who wishes to end the Iranian nuclear program. That window of opportunity exists because Israel eviscerated a few months back Iran's entire air defense program. So the skies over Iran are totally clear right now. Not only that, but Iran still has not developed retaliatory capacity that would deter action by, say, Israel. If Iran is capable of standing the Israelis down by negotiating with the United States for prolonged periods of time, that is their win. Simply the negotiations being dragged out over a lengthy period of time is something the Iranians are going for pretty clearly. The two sides are still very far apart on the question of whether Iran gets to retain its nuclear enrichment program. Witkoff has sent mixed messages himself because, again, he has no expertise in any of these issues. he set out what he called clear U.S. red lines, that Iran can't have an enrichment program under a deal, nor should it have any centrifuges, which enrich uranium. And then Iran came back and said they would never accept any such.
If you feel like your brain craves pleasure from lust just as much as it craves being a man of integrity, it's probably no coincidence that God put this in front of you.
W God.
President Masoud Pezeshkian, who again is a stand-in for the mullahs, said Iran has never sought and will never seek nuclear weapons, but it will not back down from its peaceful nuclear rights. After Sunday's talk, Araki said Iran was open to adjusting the amount of enrichment it does and the purity of the material being produced for a limited period as a confidence-building measure. But he said there is no room for discussion about Iran's continued domestic enrichment. So what exactly is Iran giving away that makes Steve Witkoff and company optimistic in any way? Again, this is just so Iran can delay. And President,
I find it interesting on how Ben Shapiro is talking about negotiations. I could be wrong, but follow me here for a second. Don't you find it interesting that as he talks about these negotiations for people he does not like, he's using the label Steve Witkoff, using him as the claimant of the wrongful actions that you're referring to. I think that's fine in general. I don't really have a strong principle to the idea of using Steve Witkoff as the target of your dismay. However, I feel like, this is my intuition, that if it was Joe Biden, you wouldn't say the negotiator, you would just say Joe Biden. Joe Biden's negotiations. You would call him out. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I think that he's constantly saying Steve Witkoff so he doesn't have to say Donald Trump. That's just me.
President Trump doesn't want to bomb Iran, which again, he has set out as sort of binary. There's a third option here, by the way, which is that the United States maintains maximum pressure on Iran, and then Israel goes and attacks the Iranian nuclear facilities. I think that is actually the most likely outcome here if I'm just gaming out the possibilities for the next several months. With all of that said, all of this ties into broader Middle Eastern negotiations that are happening over everything from the Abraham Accords to the release of hostages to the future of the Gaza Strip to what's happening in Iran. Now, all of this crosses paths, obviously, with President Trump's visit to the Middle East this week. The biggest story in terms of the media coming out this week is a story reported by ABC News, among others, that the Trump administration is now preparing to accept a super luxury Boeing 747-8 jumbo jet from the royal family of Qatar. It is a $400 million gift available for use by President Trump as new Air Force One until shortly before he leaves office, at which time, according to the deal, the plane doesn't stay with the United States government. It then moves to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation. According to ABC News, the gift had been expected to be announced when President Trump was on his visit to Qatar. A senior White House official said it's not going to happen in Qatar anymore, presumably thanks to social media blowback. President Trump put out a statement on Truth Social about the blowback, saying, so the fact that the Defense Department is getting a gift free of charge of a 747 aircraft to replace the 40-year-old Air Force One temporarily in a very public and transparent transaction. So
I'm be right back and get some water.
So bothers the crooked Democrats, they insist we pay top dollar for the plane. Anybody can do that. The Dems are world-class losers. MAGA. So, again, the arrangement itself is, shall we say, I believe the legal term is skeezy. Sources told ABC News that lawyers for the White House counsel's office and the Department of Justice drafted an analysis for the Defense Department, concluding it's legal for the DOD to accept the aircraft as a gift and then later turn it over to the Trump library. And that somehow does not violate laws against bribery or the Constitution's prohibition on emoluments. The Constitution literally says the U.S. government cannot accept official gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state. Apparently, Attorney General Pam Bondi and the top White House lawyer, David Warrington, concluded it would be legally permissible for the donation of the aircraft to be conditioned on transferring its ownership to Trump's presidential library before the end of his term. And apparently, Pam Bondi, who it should be mentioned at this point was once an actual FARA registered agent acting on behalf of the government of Qatar, provided a legal.
So basically, President Trump, after he's done being president, could just take this plane. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about this.
A legal memorandum addressed to the White House counsel's office last week after Warrington asked her for advice on the legality of the Pentagon accepting such a donation. We'll get to more on that in a second. First, choosing Simply Safe for our studio was one of our easy equipment. D-Day money back. Eating potentially. It's zip can try. Zip, Woodcock says. They try to stuff money in dollar jet out of it's tomorrow. Let's start off with this. Qatar is not allegedly giving President Trump a $400 million jet out of the goodness of their sweet little hearts, no matter what Special Envoy Steve Woodcock says. They try to stuff money in pockets in totally bipartisan fashion. Just rewind a few years. While Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Qatar gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation for Bill Clinton's birthday and didn't even bother to inform the State Department as they promised they would do. So, again, Qatar will court anyone it thinks will have power, Republican or Democrat. It's an equal opportunity influencer, as long as you can help whitewash their image or smooth over the fact that they are, in fact, the world's largest proponent of terrorism on an international scale in terms of PR and in terms of putting money in pockets. Qatar likes to present a modern Western-friendly face while shoveling money to Islamic terrorists under the table. This is a regime that has, for literally decades, funneled billions of dollars into the hands of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Taliban. We're talking about systematic, ongoing financial support that has strengthened Hamas's grip on Gaza, provided them with the resources, and yes, enabled terror attacks that killed innocent civilians. Doha, which is the capital, their five-star hotels are basically a retirement home for Hamas leaders. Qatar has been credibly accused by the Treasury Department, by international watchdogs, by regional allies of allowing financiers of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood to operate within its borders. This is a country that has repeatedly failed to crack down on terrorist financing, even after being pressured by the United States and its neighbors. In 2017, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates said, quote, "I don't know instances in which Qatar aggressively goes after networks of Hamas, Taliban, or Al-Qaeda." Qatar has, of course, transferred almost $2 billion to Hamas over the years, which, again, is one of the reasons it's so sick to send Idan Alexander to meet with the Emir of Qatar, if that's a thing that ends up happening. Here is the former Saudi foreign minister, again, not Westerner, Saudi foreign minister, Adel Al-Jubeir, explaining the problems with Qatar.
I didn't realize how much of a player Qatar is with all this. It's kind of crazy.
The Qataris, since the mid-90s, have been sponsoring radicals. They have been inciting people. They have become a base for the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, you have to keep in mind, is what begot us Takfir and Hijrah, which begot us Al-Qaeda, which begot us Al-Nusra. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on television and justify suicide bombings. That's not acceptable. The Qataris harbor and shelter terrorists. That's not acceptable.
Again, that's the Sauds. So how does Qatar excuse all of this? Well, Qatar simply says they don't actually consider terrorist groups to be, terrorists. Here was the Emir of Qatar saying as much back in 2014.
No, we do recognize extremists. We believe if they're extremists, we believe that they're extremists, and we don't fund extremists. But there are differences. There are differences that some countries and some people, that any group which comes from Islamic background are terrorists, and we don't accept that.
Okay, so some of the groups they don't consider to be terrorists would be, like all the ones we mentioned, Hamas, Hezbollah.
Interesting. Because the name I hear mostly, I don't really look into international affairs as much as I look into domestic ones. But the name that I hear all the time is Iran. They're the ones controlling everything. I never hear the name Qatar getting brought up. So
Taliban. Qatar essentially plays both sides of the table. They say they should be given leeway because they're the negotiation point for the West and terrorist groups. But then Qatar helps fund and house those terrorist groups, as well as doing the bidding of Iran. You know who says this, actually? President Trump. There was President Trump on Qatar in June 2017.
The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level. And in the wake of that conference, nations came together and spoke to me about confronting Qatar over its behavior. So we had a decision to make. Do we take the easy road, or do we finally take a hard but necessary action? We have to stop the funding of terrorism.
Okay, well, How does Qatar combat these allegations? The answer is they spread the money everywhere.
So, isn't this like, doesn't this perfectly encapsulate bribery? Who's Qatar bribing? Doesn't this perfectly encapsulate what we've been saying about Donald Trump and his hypocrisy? Like, Ben, you have to look at this objectively and go like, he said this about Qatar. Then he accepts a $400 billion airplane as a gift from Qatar. Like 1 + 1 is not equaling 2 here. So I think it's pretty clear that the standard is being doubled and the hypocrisy is glaring. I mean, I just hope that this stuff more, because I consider Ben Shapiro intelligent. I do think sometimes he gets blinded based off his Republican allegiances. I just hope like some of this just becomes so blatant. It's like at this point I can't defend it. But at least we're getting some criticism. But it's kind of crazy he said that and then accepted a airplane. I'm just saying.
Everywhere. According to the Network Contagion Research Institute, Qatar is by far the single largest donor to American universities since 9/11. By far, it's not close. You want to talk about foreign influence operations?
I didn't know that. Being by far the number one donor is kind of crazy. But I mean, so the question is, if someone donates money, if an entity donates money, I mean, if you think that entity that's donating the money is evil, then like, of course you're going to think there's like something shady happening. Like, I don't like Donald Trump. If Donald Trump donated money to my podcast, then people are going to look at me like, wait, what? Right? So, very interesting.
This would be that. They're not doing that because they're so sweet and nice. Why exactly would they sign these giant checks unless they got something in return? Here's the Prime Minister of Qatar this week explaining to the Georgetown Doha campus. Yes, Georgetown has a campus in Qatar that the service of Qatar had to be their guiding light as part of a greater national project on behalf of Qatar. Since today, he said in Arabic, I urge you to fear God in your conscience and let the service of the nation and its people be your guiding light and maintain your faith in yourselves. In a time where transformations are accelerating and crises are deepening, from the Gaza tragedy to regional tensions, Qatar reaffirms its commitment to mediation and diplomacy as a means to protect civilians. Our credibility is built through continuous action. Okay, so what exactly is he saying? He says they're churning out people who work for Qatar. Okay. The greater national project doesn't end at Qatar's borders. Their influence matters. That is why Georgetown University, which has a branch in Doha, just gave a medal to a Qatari royal who praised Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, after October 7th. Qatar is also the home of Al Jazeera, the pro-terrorism media network that spreads anti-American, anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic bile across the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Qatar Investment Authority, QIA, controls, according to the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, between $500 billion and $1 trillion in assets. And they use those assets to put themselves in positions of influence. So, for example, in August 2023, the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund bought the Park Lane Hotel in New York for $623 million. Okay. The company was owned by Steve Witkoff's company. The company had been in limbo. Okay, Park Lane Hotel was in limbo for 6 years following the attempted seizure of the hotel by the DOJ, thanks to corruption charges against one of the original owners, a guy named Lo Take Zhou. So when Steve Witkoff says that he really, really likes the Qataris, well, I mean, he does have some warm relations with the Qataris.
I mean, like, well, now I see why Ben Shapiro doesn't like Steve Witkoff. But I mean, like, again, you see all these things that are, I'm going to let him finish because, I mean, it's so black and white to me that I just feel like Ben Shapiro should be much more critical of the man that he's so allegiant to.
I think in the case of the Qataris, they're criticized for not being well motivated. It's preposterous. They are well motivated. They're good, decent people. What they want is a mediation that's effective, that gets to a peace goal. And why? Because they're a small nation and they want to be acknowledged as a peacemaker.
Taking sacks of goodies from people who support Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera, all the rest. That's not America first. Like, please define America first in a way that says you should take sacks of cash from the Qatari royals who are behind Al Jazeera. It just isn't America first in any conceivable way. So back to the original question. Is this good for President Trump? Is it good for his agenda? Is it good for draining the swamp and getting things done? The answer is no, it isn't. It isn't. If you want President Trump to succeed, this kind of skeezy stuff needs to stop. And here's the thing. It's already having an impact. It's already having an impact. Quick example.
It's just like the leniency. He's willing to criticize Steve Witkoff. He's willing to criticize Pam Bondi. He just won't take that extra step. He just refuses to take the extra step and criticize the man that they're all allegiant to. The man that they see as their Lord and Savior. He's just so close to finally seeing the light. He's so close, Ben Shapiro.
Example. Last week, the Senate considered a procedural vote on the so-called Genius Act. This is an act that should have had wide bipartisan support. The Genius Act helps you regulate the crypto industry, an area that's vital for America's economic development. As you all know, I'm a big fan of crypto. I own Bitcoins and Ethereum. If you want to watch me explain why crypto is fascinating and useful, check out my YouTube video on the subject. And I know a ton of people in the crypto industry who've been ecstatic about President Trump's deregulatory approach to the subject, which is awesome. But the bill was shot down last week because, at least in part, Democrats said they wouldn't vote for the thing because of President Trump's use of crypto himself. You all remember President Trump launching $Trump crypto 3 days before taking office as president. Trump himself announced the Trump crypto on X and Truth Social. He described it as a meme coin, meaning it had no inherent value. It was just there for the kind of bleeps and giggles. The price spiked to a trading value of nearly $13 billion, making it the 19th most valuable cryptocurrency on planet Earth. And then it proceeded to plummet, like really, really dive. The project allegedly netted people associated with it, meaning the Trump organizations associated with the Trump crypto, some $350 million. 80% of the outstanding supply of that meme coin is still held by insiders, presumably members of the Trump organization. Overall, according to data shared with CNBC, there were 2 million wallets that bought that Trump meme coin. 764,000 of them lost money. 58 wallets made more than $10 million. And then in April, that Trump meme coin announced that the top 220 holders of the meme coin would be invited to an intimate private dinner with President Trump at his golf club. The top 25 were invited to a VIP White House tour. According to Bloomberg News, 19 of the top 25 holders of that Trump meme coin that have registered on the website's leaderboard have bought the coins using foreign exchanges that claim to exclude U.S. customers, which means that foreigners are buying a lot of the meme coin and then getting meetings with President Trump, and VIP White House tours, and all the rest. This raises the question of influence peddling. If you basically buy a bunch of Trump meme coin and then funnel money to organizations associated with President Trump so that you can have dinner with Trump, that doesn't look great. Democratic senators, of course, immediately announced that they wanted an ethics probe. They sent a letter saying, quote, "This latest action raises grave ethics and legal concerns, including the severe risk that President Trump and other officials may be engaged."
Why did he, he's so close. He's like Shapiro is so close and realizing how shitty Trump is. But his Republican allegiance is just preventing him. You just explained some blatant corruption when it comes to Donald Trump and this meme coin. You explained it perfectly. You just explained something that we've all been saying for so long. And the best you can say about it, it doesn't look great. Because if Joe Biden did that, you'd be calling him one of the most corrupt person in United States history, and you might even want to try to get him impeached. The energy, man, it's not there. But it's close. It's close to being where it should be.
Engaging in pay-to-play corruption by selling presidential access to individuals or entities to include foreign nationals and corporate actors with vested interest in federal action while personally enriching the president and his family. It might be overstated, but let's be clear. Some people do seem to be investing in the Trump meme coin for the access. I mean, there was literally a CEO of a company called Freight Technologies that just bought $20 million worth of Trump meme coin, which I got to say is not like the most solid investment. What was the explanation? Quote, "We believe the addition of the official Trump tokens are an excellent way to diversify our crypto treasury and also an effective way to advocate for fair, balanced, and free trade between Mexico and the United States. So to impact policy." Again, not the least skeezy thing I've ever heard. Now, listen, maybe all of this is overblown. Maybe it's all nonsense. Maybe some of it's not true. And
like I said, the energy just so low for something so drastic.
I understand some of it's being reported by legacy media outlets. But again, here is the question. Does any of this help advance the president's agenda? You know, the agenda that we all voted for, the agenda we want to see implemented. Does this make his presidency stronger or weaker? Now, I'm going to repeat again. I don't know whether this activity is criminal in any way, but things do not have.
You don't know. Ben, you don't know. I'm just disappointed. I'm just
Not have to be criminal to hurt the agenda. If you want President Trump's agenda to succeed, taking jets from Qatar is not the way. Taking real estate deals from Qatar is not the way. The largest obstacle to any administration is scandal. From Watergate to Whitewater, scandal-plagued administrations have a really tough time gathering the political capital necessary to actually effectuate their agenda. And that's why it's unbelievably important that the Trump administration avoid scandal. That is the reason I'm worried about this stuff. Yes, I think inherently it is bad. I do not think this is good. I think if we switch the names to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, we'd all be freaking out on the right. Let's say if...
Wait, hold up. Did I hear what I just heard? Did I hear consistency? Wait, whoa. I'm shocked. Let's continue.
Say if Qatar was giving Joe a $400 million jet for his use at his presidential library after his presidency, or if Hunter launched a crypto firm with the son of Antony Blinken and then launched a series of crypto products in which mysterious strangers, including foreigners, were investing, all while that crypto firm was being regulated by Joe's administration, we'd all have been pretty upset on the right. We might have said that it was worthy of some coverage. Now, as I say, again, it could be all of these reporters, all of them. Maybe it's all just a misreading of perfectly innocent business. Sure.
The benefit of the doubt you're giving here is giving me mixed signals, Ben. Stand 10 toes. I know you're trying to give yourself some wiggle room so you can be a little bit more, hey, I'm still on your side, Trump. I'm not a never Trumper like Tim Miller. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. It's possible. But the point is this. President Trump has enemies all over the place. He has people seeking to take advantage of their proximity to his power. He has media outlets that would love nothing better than to set him up for another impeachment. And I promise you, if these issues begin to dog his administration, Republicans will lose Congress. It's that simple. Republicans are this close to losing Congress anyway. And then whatever President Trump hopes to do, whatever agenda we all voted for, will be DOA. The investigations will never end. There will be more impeachments. All of that will happen. The administration's policy is too important for this sort of activity. President Trump promised to drain the swamp. This is not, in fact, draining the swamp. President Trump was elected based on the American people being sick and tired of the swamp, tired of Hunter, tired of the Clintons, tired of the Biden crime family. Why in the world would President Trump be well served by this sort of vulnerability? Again, more importantly, why would those of us who voted for him, who gave to his campaign, who stumped for him, campaigned for him, be well served by this? The answer is we aren't. And that's why it needs to stop. Get some more on this in a moment. First, give your family.
Like I can practically, I'm trying to, how do I want to phrase this? I'm trying to think if I would have the same leeway for an individual that I truly believe would help the country. Would I give this guy the same leeway? And for me, because I'm not ideologically captured for Democrat or Republican parties or either party, I can honestly, with 100% certainty, say that it doesn't matter who you are. The moment you cross the line, I will criticize you with my whole heart. And I feel like that is the difference. Because like Ben Shapiro already said, if this was Hunter and Joe, the energy would be very different. But because he believes in some of the principles, some of the things that the Donald Trump administration could do, that he's willing to sacrifice his integrity, sacrifice his principles, sacrifice his values to see it get done. And I don't respect that. That's just me. I don't respect it. It is what it is.
Family the peace of mind they deserve with Policy Genius Life Insurance. So here's the thing. We're all going to die. I know, bad news. But Policy Genius can make sure that your family is at least financially taken care of if, God forbid, you plot. Policy Genius makes finding coverage simple, giving your loved ones a financial safety net to handle your in price than they were in any other nation, sometimes being 5 to 10 times more expensive than the same drug, manufactured in the exact same laboratory or plant by the same company. It was always difficult to explain and very embarrassing because, in fact, there was no correct or right answer. The pharmaceutical drug companies would say for years it was research and development costs, and that all these costs were and would be for no reason whatsoever borne by the suckers of America alone. Campaign contributions can do wonders, but not with me and not with the Republican Party. We are going to do the right thing, something the Democrats have fought for many years. Therefore, I am pleased to announce that tomorrow morning in the White House at 9 a.m., I'll be signing one of the most consequential executive orders in our country's history. Prescription drug and pharmaceutical prices will be reduced almost immediately by 30 to 80%. They will rise throughout the world in order to equalize, and for the first time in many years, bring fairness to America. I will be instituting a most favored nations policy whereby the United States will pay the same price as the nation that pays the lowest price anywhere in the world. Our country will finally be treated fairly. Our citizens' healthcare costs will be reduced by numbers never even thought of before. Additionally, on top of everything else, the United States will save trillions of dollars. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. Okay, so there are a few things he's trying to do here. One is he's trying to find savings in the big, beautiful tax bill that do not require cuts to Medicaid. And one of the big issues with the quote-unquote big, beautiful tax bill is the question of where cuts are coming from that Republican Congress people want to make the tax cuts, quote-unquote, deficit neutral. And so some of the questions have been, are they coming from Medicaid? And so what he's saying is we're going to lower the price of Medicaid without cuts because we're going to allow Medicaid to basically tie the price that it pays to the pharmaceutical companies for pharmaceuticals to the lowest possible price, like whatever price Sierra Leone is paying or whatever. Make no mistake, this is a backdoor price control. It is not in any way a free market policy. What we actually should be doing, and this is something that President Trump should be doing with regard to his tariff policy, is forcing up.
I'm glad he said it. It's 100% of price control that people were killing Kamala Harris for. It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Forcing other countries to pay a higher price for the medications that are produced in the United States. The way that things currently work is that foreign countries negotiate on behalf of their nationalized healthcare systems with the pharma companies. And they basically say, we're not going to buy any of these drugs unless we're paying X number of dollars. And that X number of dollars is like 30, 20% of what the actual price in a free market system would be. And so American consumers essentially pay the other end of that. American consumers are overpaying because all these other countries are underpaying. And President Trump is totally right that that is absolutely unfair. But the thing to do is to get other countries to pay more. Other countries should be absorbing more of the cost. We could be using the tariff war that he has waged on pretty much every country in order to get them to more fairly allocate resources for drug purchase from the United States. Because the problem is this, if you artificially destroy whatever profit margins exist for the pharma companies, you just won't get drugs developed. It's that simple. R&D costs a fortune. The vast majority of drugs that are developed in R&D never make it to market. They fail out in phase 2, phase 3 of the FDA trials.
He's correct.
Most never even make phase 3. There are literally tens to hundreds of billions of dollars that get spent every year by pharmaceutical companies and other companies in order to develop things that never come to fruition. It's a very high risk, investment product, biotech and pharma. And that means
why didn't he want to say high reward? That's very interesting. And maybe because he didn't want to seem pro-pharmaceutical. He's very careful with what he says because he wants to appease a very political, very specific political audience.
Means it needs to be high reward on the other end, because otherwise, why would you sink that much money into the development of these new pharmaceuticals, for example? If you destroy the profit margin, you just won't get R&D. There's a reason that over 50% of all pharma patents are filed in the United States. We're the home of that stuff because they can generate profit in the United States in a way they cannot in the UK or in France, Germany, or Canada.
That's very interesting.
It also means that American consumers bear the brunt of these brand new drugs. Now, over time, as these patents expire, as generics come on the markets move toward the generics. That is a reality. And so, for example, the idea that Americans wildly overpay for drugs, just generally speaking, Americans wildly overpay for brand new drugs that are cutting edge. That's true. But the truth is the vast majority of medication that we actually consume is not cutting edge brand new R&D drugs. Here, for example, is a chart about what Americans pay for drugs. And what this chart shows is that 91% of drug purchases in the United States are not for brand name drugs. We pay 422% higher prices for brand name drugs than do other members of the OECD, the other developed countries. However,
this is such a reasonable take. Why can't Ben Shapiro have so much more reasonable take? Like, we can really engage in this conversation knowing the facts, right? Because some other kind of like MAGA guy would just go like, oh yeah, all these brand new drugs, and really focus on the brand new drugs, even though it's a small percentage of the totality of the amount of drugs that people buy. But this is a very reasonable.
However, when it comes to generic drugs, we pay 67% of what gets paid in the OECD. So when you actually weight the average, what you find is that the United States overall actually pays less for drugs than comparable countries do. We pay more for the cutting edge drugs because they're being produced in the United States, and other countries are basically free riding off the back of that. Generic drugs, because we have a free market system, generic drugs are really cheap here compared to generic drugs in, say, Canada or the UK, France, or Germany. And so because the vast majority of drugs we consume are generic drugs and not brand name drugs, that means overall we actually pay less for drugs. So why is it that the United States pharma spending is out of control? The answer is we consume an awful lot of medicine in this country. We consume an enormous amount of medicine.
Very true.
We are fat. We are out. This is something that obviously the Make America Healthy Again movement has focused in on. We're fat. We eat crap. We don't exercise. And then we try to heal ourselves on the back end with drugs. So we take many, many more drugs than people.
Very interesting. And again, this is a conversation that like I wish we could have more of, not this like filler bullshit that MAGA keeps on putting in front of people's faces. Because there is a little legitimate conversation on how we're utilizing these drugs and these medication to return people to status quo. Now we're trying to do that with like Ozempic, for example, where otherwise the normal solution would be exercise. So it would probably be more productive if we implement a better system to keep people fit. Like imagine this. One, in school, every single way from preschool to college, there is mandatory fitness activities that people have to do. You stop recess is only good until like elementary school. No, I don't care if you call it gym time, recess. It needs to be mandatory and it needs to be every day. Fitness is just as important as it's more important than a lot of things that you learn on a day-to-day basis in school. So mandatory fitness in schools, even in college, that's a beautiful thing. That would be amazing to implement into a system. That's one thing. And then we obviously can talk about food and dieting, and all that stuff. That's another conversation altogether. But there are solutions we can kind of implement, and we can have legitimate conversation solutions. But then we talk about bullshit that MAGA wants to talk about all the time. And then I see Ben Shapiro just talking about something very interesting. Like I'm willing to have that conversation.
And people who are living in Canada, France, UK, Germany. Now, what do you do about that 422% overage when it comes to brand name pharmaceuticals? The answer is you force other countries to pay their fair share. This is where a tariff war and pressure really should be exerted, is getting the UK not to lowball American pharma. Make the UK tie its prices to America's free market prices. Why should they get to free ride off the back of the American consumer? So what is President Trump doing instead? He's saying that Medicaid should tie its price to what the UK is paying. What is that actually going to do? Well, number one, it means many cutting-edge pharmaceuticals simply will just not be available through Medicaid because Medicaid can't pay for it. You see this, by the way, all the time in Medicaid. You see that many doctors, for example, don't take Medicaid because the reimbursement rates are too low. Specialists, very many of them will take cash only or private only because the Medicaid reimbursement rates are too low. So you can see that happening with pharma, that you need a cutting edge drug and Medicaid just won't provide it because the price is too low. And big pharma is like, no, you know what? We can't afford to give it to you at that price. Even if Medicaid does in fact provide for that drug, they get that drug from big pharma. All that means is that the now higher prices to compensate for the lower prices from Medicaid get squeezed into the private sector. So it's not that the pharmaceutical companies are going to, quote unquote, make less profit, that they're greedy pharmaceutical companies and they're just stashing away cash in the back room and all this kind of, that's not true. It's not true. That's not how big pharma works at all. What will actually happen is that people who have private insurance will pay more for their insurance premiums. And insurance companies will pay significantly more on the other end. So this attempt to, quote unquote, lower prices, in the aggregate, it's not going to lower prices. In the aggregate, it may lower prices on the available drugs for Medicaid, but it will increase prices for everybody in the private sector. And with regard to sort of the overall reduction of prices, there's no way to do that without also destroying the R&D. This is a point that the Wall Street Journal actually made last week. They pointed out that drugs accounted for less than 4% of Medicaid spending, $21.2 billion in 2023. The feds spent 10 times more on hospital payments. Even if Republicans required drug makers to give away medicines to Medicaid, savings would not actually amount to what Republicans need in terms of this tax bill. They need $880 billion in savings. Trying to wring more money out of drug makers might cause some companies to stop participating in Medicaid, as we discussed. This is the Wall Street Journal. Patients would then suffer from less access to novel treatments as they do in countries with socialized health systems that impose price controls. Some drug makers already lose money on medicines they sell to Medicaid. They compensate by raising those prices in the commercial market. And that is likely to be what the future looks like. And the notion that free market economies, that they don't adjust and move with regard to regulation, it's not true. Pharmaceutical companies cannot just quote unquote charge whatever they want because eventually the patents expire, number one. Number two, there's competition in the marketplace. And so other big pharma companies are trying to encroach on the territory of you discover a new drug, and within 5 minutes, somebody else is trying to discover a new pathway for the new drugs. You can see this with Ozempic. Right? Ozempic was really, really expensive. And very, very quickly, you're seeing people fill the marketplace for Ozempic with knockoffs, other semaglutides, people who are attempting now to create oral versions of Ozempic so you don't actually have to take a shot. Like the market does an amazing job of taking what were luxury products and making them available to the common man. This is true everywhere. It's true in medicine too. Things that you now consider to be absolutely baseline medical care.
Is he just talking about the pharmaceutical market, or is he talking about the free capitalist market in general? Because, I mean, pharmaceutical market, I don't know enough to really consider whether or not that's true. Free capitalist market, hard to say. But we do try to prevent certain monopolies. But hard to say. I don't know if that's generally true when it comes to the general market.
Care, say chemotherapy if you have cancer. That stuff was considered a luxury item way back when. Because when you first develop this stuff, it's expensive. This is what capitalism does. Capitalism takes luxuries and it makes them available to the common man. I mean, look at your cell phone. Go back and watch Wall Street, a movie made in 1987 by Oliver Stone. It's about one of the richest people on earth, Gordon Gekko. Right? Gordon Gekko, there's a scene where he's walking around with an unthinkable device on the beach. An absolutely unthinkably technologically advanced product. He's holding.
So he's talking about the free capitalist market in general. In general, I agree. There's no need for me to kind of go into details and specifics. In general, I agree.
Holding basically a radio to his head. And he's walking around on the beach with a cell phone. And at the time, people must have watched and whoa, that dude is loaded. Look at that. Look at it. He's walking around on a beach, not connected to no wire, just with a cell phone that looks like a shoebox. Wow, look at that. And now, of course, every single person, including the poorest Americans, has a cell phone. Everyone. How did that happen? It didn't happen through government subsidization of cell phones. It happened through free market economics. If you want better drugs, if you want better treatments, if you want all that, all the people who rip on Big Pharma are perfectly happy to use products developed by Big Pharma the minute they get sick. R&D is an absolutely necessary component to lengthening the lifespans and bettering the health of people who really are sick. And any sort of executive action, first of all, I don't know where in the Constitution it just says that the president gets to randomly do the kinds of things that presidents of both parties are doing right now. I don't. There used to be this thing. It's now a vestigial organ of American government. It used to be called the legislature. You know, you would elect people to Congress and the Senate, and they'd make specific policies that were directed at specific outcomes.
And he refuses. I get. So this is the strategy MAGA does all the time. Or Republicans. I'm going to say Republicans. Anytime they have a real criticism for Donald Trump, they always say both parties. Because what that does is it alleviates responsibility for individual actions, and it normalizes actions on a status quo of a broken system. And then you can reroute the idea of Donald Trump in this broken system to then praise him for breaking the broken system. So he gets no blame, and then he gets praise for destroying a system that is the current status quo. It's a very diluted way to alleviate someone so much responsibility. Whereas you can do something very simple, very easy. Call out Donald Trump for what he's doing instead as an individual. And then after you call out what the individual is doing, you establish that I don't want other people to do the same thing. And when it comes to initiating these executive orders, yeah, Kamala Harris has indicated that she wanted a version of price controls or price caps or whatever. Nobody's doing what Donald Trump is doing with these executive orders. Like, it's night and day. It's not even, there's no one even comparable right now.
The outcomes. And then you could vote on them and you could throw them out of office if you didn't like what they were doing. Now, apparently, the president of the United States has the power to unilaterally increase prices in the United States with gigantic tariff regimes at the drop of a hat, price control pharmaceuticals, declare national emergencies on everything available. And again, this didn't start with President Trump. I know there are people out there, oh, Trump is breaking the Constitution. As almost always, President Trump is rarely the murderer. He is often the coroner. The system was broken, and Trump simply points to the system and says it's broken, and then does the same thing Democrats were doing, and everybody goes nuts. We should.
Ben Shapiro literally did what I just said. Again, I don't need to explain it again. He literally just explained what I just said that they do.
Been going nuts about this, 100 years ago with the rise of the administrative state under Woodrow Wilson. But now we're feeling the effects of all of that. When the president of the United States can, with a signature, put the R&D part of Big Pharma on the bankruptcy line, that is a problem. Forget whether you like the policy or not. I don't. The president should not have the unilateral power to do this. By the way, the same thing holds true with regard to things like the Federal Reserve. The fact that we all sit here waiting day after day for Jerome Powell, one guy, to tell us what the interest rates are going to be is psychotic. None of that is how a market ought to work. It is centralized government economics, and it is bad. It is not good. And it does not bear, by the way, the same sort of fruit that people want it to bear. People think that that means everything is hunky-dory because the president can solve things with one signature. Checks and balances are actually quite a good thing. As a general rule, they are a very good thing. All right, meanwhile, in other news, there are developments with regard to Ukraine and Russia. So Vladimir Zelensky now says that he is willing to meet with Vladimir Putin. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ukrainian President Zelensky challenged Putin to meet him in Istanbul this week in Turkey after President Trump swung behind the Russian president's offer of talks before a ceasefire. So Putin has not declared a ceasefire. Zelensky said, I'm willing to accept a 30-day ceasefire. He's said this for weeks and weeks and weeks at this point. Putin has never accepted like a 5-minute ceasefire. He pretends to, but it's not real. So now Putin said, I'm willing to do face-to-face negotiations with Zelensky, presumably while the war continues. And Zelensky had said, how about this? How about you declare a 30-day ceasefire, and then we start talking? And President Trump said, you know what? I just want you at the table. Don't care whether it's a ceasefire or not, even though the ceasefire was originally President Trump's idea. But is it good that Zelensky and Putin are talking? Sure. I mean, the real question is going to be what comes out of the talks. So Zelensky said that he would be waiting for Putin in Turkey on Thursday, raising the stakes amid a flurry of diplomatic exchanges and brinkmanship over the weekend, where both sides sought to balance not making any significant concessions with placating President Trump, who's demanding an end to the 3-year war. Now, Putin originally didn't respond to Zelensky's offer. Again, it goes beyond the scope of Putin's suggestion of reviving peace talks. Trump's support of the Russian president's proposal, a switch in his position, initially upended European efforts to bring pressure to bear on Russia to halt the war. Trump then, over the weekend, he said, Ukraine should agree to this immediately. This is after Putin said, let's just get together and talk face-to-face without any ceasefire. And Trump said on social media that Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At least they'll be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. If it's not, European leaders in the U.S. will know where everything stands and can proceed accordingly. Zelensky, who earlier had wanted a truce, a 30-day ceasefire as a condition of the talks, responded immediately. So again, Zelensky is doing the stuff that Trump wants him to do. Let's be clear. Who is doing what Trump wants him to do when it comes to Putin Zelensky? The answer is Vladimir Zelensky is doing the stuff Trump wants him to do. There's no other way to read this. Trump is calling for things, and Zelensky is doing them. Trump wants a rare earths minerals deal. Zelensky says, sure. President Trump wants a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky says, sure. President Trump wants a 30-day ceasefire out the windows. They can negotiate. Zelensky says, sure. And every step of the way, Putin is delaying. Because Putin is basically gambling that at a certain point, President Trump gets bored and walks away. That's the gamble. And it takes 18 months to 2 years for European weaponry to actually ship into Ukraine and adjust so that Ukraine can defend itself without American input. It's one of the big problems people don't want to talk about. Again, policy has a long tail. Because we watch politics in real time, we think a policy happens and then immediately it's implemented. That is not how it works. If the United States cuts off aid to Ukraine, it is not as though European arms immediately flow in. Much of the aid that has been provided to Ukraine militarily is only compatible with American ammo, for example. You can't just ship in European ammo to use in American armaments. You can't do it. It takes a while to replace all of that stuff.
I did not know that. See, this is the version of Ben Shapiro I like, even though, yeah, he is very Republican biased. This is the version of Ben Shapiro I like. The one that is willing to have like the important conversations and realistic criticism. Now, obviously, I can weed out the certain biases and the potential over exaggeration based off certain principles that he has, but it's some information that he is saying that is very interesting to know.
Needs to be at least a sort of runway for things to change over there. Putin's assuming the United States will precipitously pull out and it'll look like Afghanistan. That is what happened in Afghanistan, by the way. The United States was providing aerial oversight for the Afghan government in opposition to the Taliban. The United States pulled all of its air support, and the Taliban immediately took over, and the Afghan government immediately collapsed. That is what Putin is hoping right now. He's hoping whatever support the United States is providing in terms of intelligence, in terms of ammo, that goes away, and then the gap is not filled quickly enough by the European Union. That's the gamble that Putin is playing right now. I don't think that President Trump falls for that trap, by the way. Zelensky put out a statement on social media. He said, there is no point in prolonging the killings. And then he said, I hope this time Putin won't be looking for excuses as to why he can't make it. So he's showing up in Turkey, basically saying, I dare you to show up so we can talk.
This is your brain when you're struggling to focus. And this
One day earlier, Putin rebuffed a ceasefire ultimatum from Kyiv and its Western allies, instead calling for direct talks. Ukraine and Russia's positions remain far apart. Russia basically wants land ceded to it. It hasn't even won in this battle. Meanwhile, Putin also would like for Ukraine to unilaterally disarm, no military support, no membership in NATO, all of which are not going to be a starter on the conversation. Russia's been ramping up its offensives according to Deep State, which is an independent Ukrainian battlefield monitoring group. They said Russia conducted more attacks during the recent 3-day ceasefire called by Putin in early May than in the same period the prior month. So we'll see what shakes out in Turkey. Putin is speaking with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is the dictatorial Islamist leader of Turkey, who's very much aligned with Russia, about his proposed talks in Istanbul starting at May 15th. President Erdogan said a comprehensive ceasefire would create the necessary environment for peace talks, but Russia just denied it. So once again, Russia appears to be stalling for time in all of this. Representative Michael McCall, Republican of Texas, said, it's pretty clear here Russia's not making a lot of concessions.
There was a 30-day ceasefire called for. Mr. Putin decided to bomb Ukraine on Palm Sunday. He's not making any concessions at all, while Zelensky seems to be making all the concessions. So if the bottom line is Putin has to agree to a 30-day ceasefire for any peace talks to go forward. And the land that he is asking for is, that even J.D. Vance talked about this and the president, land that Russia has not even occupied in Ukraine. So he has to operate in good faith. We want peace, but not peace at any price.
Okay, so that's going to be the question. And we'll find out in short order what exactly Putin is willing to do. My guess is not particularly a lot. And meanwhile, it is amazing to watch as the media.
So the question is, and this is what we've been saying, a lot of us who've been very critical of Donald Trump. The question is, will he bend the knee to Putin? That's the $1 million question. Ben Shapiro said he wouldn't. I think he will. We will see.
Media and the Democrats ramp up their attacks on John Fetterman. Fetterman, of course, is the very heterodox Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. He's been heterodox with regard to President Trump. He kind of grumpily rejects media attacks that he thinks are unfair against President Trump. He's, of course, been incredibly pro-Israel, shocking everybody who happens to be pro-Israel. Because, of course, Fetterman was aligned with the sort of far left wing of the Democratic Party when he was running against Mehmet Oz, who is now part of the Trump administration. Well, now Democrats are trying to claim he has mental problems. So the way this works is if you're Joe Biden and you clearly have mental problems and mental disabilities, but you're willing to provide a face for crap Democratic policy, you're totally fine. You're fine. Everything is good. No problems whatsoever. But if you're John Fetterman and you have a stroke in the middle of a race with Mehmet Oz, and everybody's like, whoa, that seems bad. Democrats are like, he's fine. It's all
good. Fair enough. Well, shout out Ben Shapiro, man.